Joe Biden ran one of the biggest censorship operations in United States history. But what if I told you he's not the only one? And he isn't the worst. There is a two-term president whose record on censorship was even worse. But before we go there, we need to understand just how large Joe Biden's operation was, how unethical an administration could be, how they could control what we see, what we say, and what we believe. Under Joe Biden, things got aggressive. His team pressured platforms like Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter to remove content that they thought was misinformation and harmful towards public health and safety. Internal documents show that they flagged posts, they demanded takedowns, and even had regular meetings with platform executives. They had shared calendars, weekly meetings, and even a content portal to review posts. Sometimes those posts were lies, like the vaccine changes your DNA. Sometimes those posts were personal stories, anecdotes from women about how the vaccine affected their menstrual cycle. Conversation around stories like that actually came up so much that the NIH in 2021 funded numerous studies to see the effects of vaccines on women's menstrual cycles. By 2023, they concluded that there was no effects. And sometimes those posts were true, uncomfortable truths, like Alex Berenstein's report about the relationship between vaccines, infections, and myocarditis in young men. Though his interpretations of the data was provocative and his conclusions were a bit misconstrued, still, the information shared was factually correct. So they had no reason to remove those posts. But not only did they do that, Biden banned him from Twitter for life. And you remember Mark Zuckerberg going on Joe Rogan talking about how Biden's White House administration called them up, yelled, cursed, and threatened them to remove certain posts. I mean, Biden went as far as to go on national TV and say that Facebook was killing people for spreading misinformation. All of that pressure worked. Warning labels were added to over 190 million posts on Facebook, and they removed 20 million posts altogether. Was this censorship? Yes, but the Supreme Court ultimately ruled it wasn't, stating that the government didn't force Facebook and YouTube and these platforms to make these decisions. It was consensual, it was coordinated, it was collaborative. The MAGA-leaning 6-3 conservative-sided Supreme Court sided with Joe Biden, stating that what occurred was indirect government censorship. Zuckerberg even notes later on in that Joe Rogan interview that after a point, they didn't wait on Biden's team to give them instructions on what posts to remove. They saw what the policy was and they did things themselves from there. But let's be honest, even though this seemed to be collaborative between Biden and the platforms, we gotta be honest. This was heavy-handed influence by the government. But let's just play devil's advocate really quickly. It's important to understand why they did this. Now, the lockdown started in March 2020, and Joe Biden took office in January 2021. And by then, over 400,000 people had died to COVID. Now, vaccine rollout was fast thanks to Trump, but misinformation about the vaccine was spreading faster. The Biden administration saw all of this as a public health emergency, and they acted like it was. Ergo, the heavy-handed influence on the media platforms. So during a global pandemic, he decided to take a utilitarian approach, the most good for the most amount of people. He focused on freedom from harm rather than freedom from government. Now, it was unethical to infringe on people's freedom from government, but it was also unethical to allow people to die to misinformation. We all understand the negative rights of where a government can't overstep, but we need to understand the positive rights as well of why a government exists at all, to protect its people from a harm that is a larger scale than what we can individually protect ourselves, i.e. a global pandemic. However, in response, Trump made it very clear where he stood on this philosophical dilemma. He took a deontological, Kantian type approach. The stance that no matter the repercussions, freedom of speech is our God-given right, and it's an inviolable right. But do you remember that two-term president I was talking about earlier? Well, guess who it was? That's right. It was Donald Trump. While Trump says he's a champion of free speech, his record on the matter says something different entirely. In his first term, he blocked critics from his official government Twitter account, and the Supreme Court said that that's a no-go. It was gravely unconstitutional to withhold the words of the president from one of its citizens. Then he deletes over 1,400 pages of science and environmental data from the government's websites, including entire sections about climate change and pollutions. His CDC staff was told not to use the words transgender, diversity, evidence-based and science-based. He issued gag orders and stopped federal scientists and staff from speaking to the public or to Congress without permission. He banned diversity training from federal agencies and its contractors, saying that it was divisive. That order impacted universities, nonprofits, hospitals. Even private companies had their conversations in the workplace silenced. The federal government was silencing its own workers and erasing its own public data. And that's just the first term. He's done all of this and more in his second term. Remember that court ruling about indirect government censorship? Well, when you have the president and the FCC chair, Brendan Carr, go on TV and social media and call for the firings of Colbert and Kimmel and however many others, and then they actually fire Colbert and Kimmel and however many others, that is pretty direct government censorship. But that's not all. Even the lawsuits from the New York Times that was recently thrown out, the Wall Street Journal, the CBS and ABC lawsuits, the loyalty test questions on the FBI, the DOJ being weaponized against Senator Adam Schiff and New York Attorney General Letitia James, and however many others. To him, literally saying on TV, criticizing him is illegal. I mean, it's gotten to a point that Senator Ted Cruz, Ben Shapiro, and Tucker Carlson are all saying that he's going too far here. This is way more pressure than Biden put on. And he doesn't have the cover of saying he's doing so for public health and safety. This is all just for his ego. If you really care about free speech, you will see that this is a nonpartisan issue. Yes, Biden's team leaned way too hard on media platforms. That is true. But that is a false equivalency from what we are seeing right now. I will cut Joe Biden some slack for the ethical consistency he has shown. He took a utilitarian approach at a time when utilitarian philosophy was needed. They told us in public from the get-go that they would moderate content for the reasons of public health and safety. Now, Trump boasted during the campaign that he was a free speech absolutist. But all he has done in his terms as president is silence critics, scientists, journalists, and anybody else who doesn't agree with his agenda and who doesn't complement his ego. And now they're building an even more aggressive playbook. And they are laughing, they're joking about it right in front of our faces. So now the question isn't who censored more, it's who are they going to silence next?